The ACC coaches. Let's rank them.
Subscribe to LouTube.
Oh, yeah, good morning. That is Uncle Lou here. Yeah, that's right. It is me, Uncle Lou, live on LouTube for you. Thanks for watching. I really appreciate it. Also, in addition to that as well, make sure you subscribe to the channel if you're not already. Last night on the call-in show, there was a bunch of people leaving comments saying that for some reason they had been unsubscribed from the channel. I don't know if there's some sort of YouTube glitch going around or whatever it is, but double check that you're still subscribed. Make sure you are. If you're not, hit the subscribe button. Make sure you turn the notification bells on so you know each and every time I upload a video or go live. Yesterday, I ranked all the SEC head coaches. I did both a tier list and then a specific ranking. It's easier to just do the tier list, but people always want a specific ranking. If you have 2 or 3 coaches in a tier, then you get a million questions. Well, of those 3 coaches, which one would you have higher? So I'm going to give you both. I'm going to give you sort of a tier ranking, and then at the end, I'll go through and I'll rank them 1 through, I guess there's 17 head coaches now in the ACC with the addition now of SMU, Cal, and Stanford. Same note as yesterday when it comes to brand new coaches. I don't mean brand new coaches into the ACC. I mean brand new coaches who have never been a head coach before. And in the case of the ACC, of course, I'm talking about Fran Brown at Syracuse. Yesterday when we ranked the SEC head coaches, Mississippi State, of course, has hired Jeff Lebby as head coach. He's never been a head coach before. So I can't rank him. He's barely had a recruiting cycle, half of one. You get hired towards the very end of the recruiting cycle, so you can't judge that. He's only had half of that transfer window, and we're in the other transfer window now. So it's just impossible to rank someone who's never been a head coach before. And for Syracuse and Fran Brown, they fall into that category. So they won't be in any tier, and they won't be listed in my rankings. They'll just be kind of an unranked there at Fran Brown. I do like what Fran Brown has done at Syracuse in the little time that he's been there. I think he's done all right in the portal, and I do think he will improve Syracuse from where they were. That's a sign. Garbage. Speaking of Florida, I'll be on with my good buddies over at High Top Sports tonight around 8:30. The High Top Sports channel there, the Florida fans over there. And I like those guys. I go on their show really anytime they ask me. And with spring games going on right now, they asked me if I wanted to come on over. So I'll be on their channel tonight at 8:30. So if you want to hear me talk some with them about Florida and other things in the world of college football, check out High Top Sports tonight at 8:30. But anyway, let's get to the ACC coaching tier list and rankings. All right, in the first tier, I think this is pretty obvious here. I've got Dabo Swinney and Mike Norvell, the Clemson head coach and the Florida State head coach. Now, what's interesting about these two is that they are 2 coaches, 2 teams, and 2 programs that at least over the last 3 or 4 years appear to be heading in opposite directions. Dabo Swinney, of course, won 2 national titles, one in 2016, one in 2018. He's been at Clemson forever, over 15 years now, and he's been a very successful head coach there. And there's no taking anything away from that. He is an elite level college football head coach. Now, the criticisms of Dabo, and there have been a lot lately, mostly revolve around his inability or seeming inability to adapt to the new landscape we're faced with in college football, specifically NIL and transfer portal. And those are valid criticisms. To pretend that a big section of college football just doesn't exist is not productive, I don't think, for the long run. And Florida State, on the other hand, has fully embraced NIL and transfer portal, and we have seen them ascend over the last couple of years, of course, winning the ACC last year. But let's look at some numbers here just to sort of bear that out. Mike Norvell, his first year at Florida State, 3 wins. His second year, 5 wins. Third year, 10 wins. Last year, 13 wins. If this were a graph, it would be going straight up. 3, 5, 10, and 13. That covers, of course, a 4-year period because he's been there for 4 years, heading into his 5th year. Let's look at Dabo Swinney. going all the way back to the last national title in 2018. They were undefeated. Trevor Lawrence was the quarterback, one of the best teams of the last 25 years. They were really, really good. Won the national title in 2018. The following year, one loss. The year after that, one loss, two losses, three losses, three losses, four losses. That takes us all the way up until last year, right? So to compare that with Mike Norvell over the 4-year period that Norvell has been at Florida State, again, Norvell, 3 wins, 5 wins, 10 wins, 13 wins. Juxtapose that with what Dabo Swinney has done at Clemson over the last 4 years, 2 losses, 3 losses, 3 losses, 4 losses. If you go back even further, 0 losses when they won the Natty, 1 loss the following year, 2 losses the year after that, 3 losses after that, 3 losses after that, and then the 4 losses. So at least in the recent window that we can look at, the last 4 to 5 years, Florida State has been doing this and Clemson has been doing this. And during that time period, Dabo was at Clemson, Norvell was at Florida State. But I think those are clearly the 2 best coaches right now in the ACC, Norvell and Swinney. I've got them in the top tier. Below that, I've got Brom and Duren. Now, Brom's only been in the ACC for 1 year, but he was a Power 5 head coach for much longer than that. I thought about, should Brom be in the higher tier? You know, he made the ACC title game in his first year at Louisville last year. It's taken Florida State 3 or 4 years to get there under Mike Norvell. But you can't throw out what he did at Purdue, which wasn't all that impressive. He had a decent year or two, but overall, there was nothing overwhelmingly good about what he did at Purdue. Last year at Louisville was clearly his best coaching job. I've got him in the second tier with Dave Duren. Now, what Brom did last year might be more impressive than any single thing that Dave Duren has done in his time at NC State. But he's been a pretty consistently good head coach at NC State for a while. They finished ranked last year. They're ranked inside the top 20 in every preseason ranking heading into next year. And when you're just comparing the 2 teams for right now, NC State and Louisville, they're pretty comparable in terms of expectations heading into next year. Everybody's got Louisville and NC State in their top 4 to 5 ACC teams heading into the season. The tier below that, this starts to get a little tricky here, and I'm willing to take some criticism on where I have a few of these coaches here because this got a little hard for me. But I've got Wake Forest head coach Clawson in this next tier. I've got Manny Diaz in the next tier. I've got Mario Cristobal in the next tier, and I've got Mack Brown. Let's start with Mack Brown. I think Mack Brown has been the most disappointing head coach in the ACC over the last couple of years. Not the worst, but the most disappointing. The fact that they were not even able to make it to an ACC title game in the last couple of years with Drake May at quarterback, amazing group of running backs, some NFL wide receivers, and some very highly rated defensive players in a period of time where Clemson was not playing up to par, right? They were not able to step in and fill that gap in either of the previous 2 years. And I think they had a team good enough in both years to at least play for a national title, at least play for an ACC title. And they failed to get there in each of the 2 years. And last year was a massive disappointment. However, he does have 2 national titles. And again, even though we're ranking coaches in the ACC, this isn't just a ranking of what they've done while in the ACC. You can't just throw out the fact that Mack Brown won a national title. Now, to get back for a second to the Norvell versus Swinney discussion, there's going to be a lot of Clemson fans and maybe a lot of just football fans who say Swinney is clearly ahead of Norvell. He's got 2 titles. Okay, is Mack Brown ahead of Norvell? Mack Brown's got a title, Norvell doesn't. Is Mack Brown a better coach right now than Brom or Duren? Is he better than Mario Cristobal right now? My point isn't that he is or he isn't. My point is that while winning a national title obviously vaults you way up any coaching ranking list immediately, there is a point of diminishing return in terms of how much credit you receive for that, right? Jimbo Fisher is another example of this. Won a national title at Florida State, one of the best teams I've ever seen. That team was unbelievable. Okay, how much credit do we give him for that 2 years ago at Texas A&M when we're ranking coaches. Like, eventually, you have to do something recently. And I'm not trying to compare Dabo Swinney to Jimbo Fisher or Mac Brown. Clearly, I've got Dabo Swinney ranked way ahead of Mac Brown. I'm not trying to draw a direct comparison between Dabo and Mac Brown or Dabo and Jimbo Fisher. My point is, when you're trying to differentiate between Norvell and Swinney, if all you're doing is leaning on the national title argument, I think you got to come up with something else as a reason to have Swinney ahead of Norvell if that's what you want to do. Because I don't think anybody would put Mac Brown ahead of Mike Norvell on a coaching ranking list right now. I just don't think they would do that, even though Mac Brown's got a national title. I hope that makes a little bit of sense, but that's who I've got in that next tier. The Diaz versus Cristobal debate is going to get very interesting when we move to where I have these coaches ranked, because I'm curious to see what Miami fans think about where I have those two coaches ranked. But let's go on down to the next tier after that. I've got Boston College head coach Bill O'Brien. Now, very brief stint as a head coach for him, and it didn't go great, and then he just fell on his face at Alabama as offensive coordinator. He got blamed for literally everything that went wrong there. Now, I'm not convinced it was all his fault. He had mixed success, some highs, some lows in his time in the NFL, but we're talking college head coach here. I've got him in this list. You got to remember, maybe you don't, he took over at Penn State basically right after the Joe Paterno, Jerry Sandusky situation that unfolded there. He walked into a very, very bad situation. And did he win Big Ten titles or national championships? No. But he kept Penn State from hitting the iceberg for a 3 or 4 year period. He kind of kept Penn State's head above water, kept them, I guess, relevant on the national scene, and in a lot of people's eyes, sort of saved that program from total collapse. So I can't completely discount that, but he's at Boston College now. I don't think he's going to have a whole lot of success there. I'm not personally very high on Bill O'Brien as a head coach, but this seems like a fair place to put him here with people like Rhett Lashley at SMU, who is in the Power Five for the first time this coming year, but has had some success in the Group of Five at SMU. They went 11-3 last year and won the conference championship game. He's a sort of hot young name that a lot of people know and are keeping an eye on. And I don't think anybody would be surprised if at some point in the next 4 or 5 years, Rhett Lashley is coaching at what we would consider to be a more high profile program than SMU. But this is their first year into the ACC. We'll see how he does. And then I've got a Narduzzi at Pitt. I mean, the guy's been there forever. Up and down. They did win the ACC, I guess, a couple of years ago, and he's got, before last year. Now, last year was a complete disaster. I think they were 3-9, but the 2 years prior to that, he won 20 games total. Obviously not each year total. He won the ACC one of those years. So middle of the pack seems like the right place to put Narduzzi, and that's where I've got him here in the tier ranking. Now, the tier below that, I'm not doing this to piss off Georgia Tech fans or Virginia Tech fans, okay? Virginia Tech in particular, you've heard me talk about them this offseason. I think they've got a chance to play for the ACC title this year. They were really good at the end of last year, and they have the most returning production of any team in the ACC. If they can stay healthy and if they can win a couple of toss-up type games, I wouldn't be shocked to see Virginia Tech in the ACC title game. Now, I don't think they can win it. And with Brent Key, so what Brent Pry has done there, look, you got to remember, Virginia Tech's been in the toilet for about 20 years, and it looks like he's rounding a corner. This is a crucial year for them. Last year, the first half of the season was really bad. The second half was really good. Was that a result of scheduling? Did they get some lucky breaks? Did the ball bounce their way in the second half of the season? Or are they turning a corner as a program here? Is Brent Pry turning the corner as a head coach? This year will bear that out. We'll see. And the same thing with Brent Key. Brent Key's got a better record the last 2 years than Brent Pry does. He's 11-10. He's got a winning record as the Georgia Tech head coach. I mean, this is a team that was winning 2 or 3 games a year under Jeff Collins. Were really bad. One of the worst teams in the Power Five. Now, do I think Brent Key and Georgia Tech have a chance to make the playoffs or win the ACC anytime in the next 3, 4, 5 years? No, I don't. But they are in much better shape right now than they were before they hired Brent Key as head coach. He was on the staff under Jeff Collins, but they're a much better team, a much better program. I still have a ton of questions about their future and how much their administration is bought into what they're doing athletically at Georgia Tech, not just in football, but in all sports. But Brent Key and Brent Pry both have a chance to move up in this tier ranking for this next year when I do this list, and could move way higher up the overall coaching ranking list that I'll put up on the screen in a minute too. So I'm not shitting on Key or Pry by having them here on the list. These are two relatively new head coaches that have not had any sort of massive success by any means. They didn't do what Brom did at Louisville, right? But they have turned around two really bad programs, and both have potential, I think, to improve on that in 2024 and move higher up this list next year. Wilcox at Cal. Cal's just an abysmal team. They did make a bowl game last year for the first time since 2019, but not a great program out there at Cal. Wilcox, and then Taylor at Stanford. And really, Taylor at Stanford, you might could put down with Tony Elliott at Virginia. The only reason I didn't put Taylor down in that lower category with Tony Elliott at Virginia is because Tony Elliott has been bad for way longer as a head coach. Maybe not way longer, but a couple of years than Taylor has at Stanford. He was 3-9 last year. And of course, Tony Elliott at Virginia, previous coordinator under Dabo at Clemson, takes the head coaching job at Virginia, another team that's been down for a long, long time, and they've just done nothing of note there. They haven't been good at all. I've got him dead last in the tier list here. And then Fran Brown, of course, as mentioned, I'm not ranking Fran Brown either in the tier list or the actual ranking list, which I'm fixing to show you now, because he's never been a head coach anywhere before ever. So, we'll rank him next year. I do like the hire, though. All right, here's my specific exact ranking for for the ACC head coaches, and I've got Mike Norvell at number 1 and Dabo Swinney at number 2. This has been talked about by me and anybody else with a YouTube channel or a Twitter account or a Facebook page. Anybody that's talked college football in the last 2 or 3 years has talked about Dabo Swinney's seeming stubbornness, hard-headedness, and unwillingness to take advantage of the transfer portal, to use it at all. They have brought in the least amount of transfers of any FBS team in the country, and there's 135 teams. I think they've only brought in 2 transfers total in the time that the transfer portal has existed, and one of those players was a previous Clemson player who transferred out to Northwestern and then back to Clemson. Dabo won a lot of games 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago a certain way, and if I was making this list even last year, 2 years ago, definitely 4 or 5 years ago, Dabo would be in a class by himself when it comes to ACC coaches. But we can't ignore the obvious comparison that exists right now between philosophies when it comes to Mike Norvell and Dabo Swinney, and whose philosophy is working and whose is not. And there's no argument that Mike Norvell's philosophy and approach to college football as it exists today is working better than Dabo Swinney's is. There's just no debate about it. Now, head-to-head record, Dabo dominates. Okay, Florida State beat Clemson last year. It was the first time since, I think, 2015, and they play every year other than the COVID year. Florida State beat Clemson, I think, in 2014 or 2015, and then Clemson reeled off 6 or 7 straight wins in a row. So Dabo has owned not only Florida State, but Mike Norvell head to head. And this is extremely close. And I'm willing to, this isn't one that I'm not going to die on this hill that Norvell is better than Swinney and should be ranked ahead of him. This is just where I have him. I went back and forth. This was really hard to do. I'm not crapping on Dabo. Dabo's a top 10 coach in the world of college football. So is Mike Norvell. So it's not like one of these two is clearly miles out in front of the other. Again, with the national title argument, where are you going to put Mac Brown? If you're telling me, well, Swinney's got 2 natties and that's the end of your argument, then I guess you're putting Swinney 1, Mac Brown 2. I guess that's what you would be doing, is trying to convince people that Mac Brown's the second best coach in the ACC. I don't believe that. You don't believe that. And the Argentinian people don't believe. Literally nobody believes that. I've got Norvell right now as a better coach than Dabo Swinney. Beat him head-to-head last year. Recency bias, if you want to call it that. And Mike Norvell's approach to NIL and the transfer portal is clearly working, whereas Dabo's is clearly not. I will remind you again. Here's Mike Norvell's record in his 4 years at Florida State. 3 wins his first year, 5 wins his second year, 10 wins his third year, 13 wins last year. Up, 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 up. 3, 5, 10, 13 wins through the roof. You compare that to what Clemson has done the last 4 years. 4 years ago, they lost 2 games. 3 years ago, they lost 3 games. 2 years ago, they lost 3 games. And last year, they lost 4. So while Florida State under Mike Norvell is winning more games every single year, during that same time period, Clemson is losing more games every single year. I've got Norvell 122. At number 3, I've got Brom, won the, there was no divisions, played in the ACC championship game in his first year at Louisville. A surprise to some, not to others. Louisville was sort of a sneaky pick last offseason to make a push at the ACC championship, and it turns out all those people were right. We'll see if he can replicate that for 2 years in a row, if it was sort of a one-hit wonder, flash in the pan type of deal. That was his issue at Purdue. He would have a good year. His name would get hot. His name would get mentioned with other coaching jobs and things like that. Then he'd have sort of a down type of year. We'll see if he can maintain that level of consistency at Louisville that he was unable to maintain at Purdue. I've got Dave Duren at 4. Dave Duren is probably the most consistent coach right now in the ACC. Not consistently good, not consistently bad. I'm just saying consistent. NC State wins between 7 and 9 games almost every single year. I mean, it seems like they're never great. They're never good enough to win the ACC. They rarely have the bottom out year, though, under Duren, where they're sitting there at 2, 3, 4 wins, something like that. They're a pretty consistently good program, and a lot of people having their eye on them this year as potentially a team that could make the ACC title game. They're ranked in the top 20 in all the rankings. I've got Dave Duren at number 4. He's been pretty consistent for a pretty long time there at NC State. Cristobal at 5 and Diaz at 6. Now, I thought about putting Diaz ahead of Cristobal here. The Miami fans would have lost their mind had I done that. But let's think about something here. Cristobal is 12 and 13. Please tell me that's not right. Yep. Mario Cristobal is 12 and 13 as the head coach at Miami. That's a losing record. And you're going to say, well, he's only been there 2 years. How long was Mario there? 3? What was his record? 21 and 15. Mario Cristobal was better at Miami in his time there so far than Manny Diaz was 21 and 15. Manny Diaz was better in his time at Miami than Mario Cristobal has been so far. That's the sort of argument to put Diaz ahead of Cristobal. Obviously, I don't have Diaz ahead of Cristobal. Why not? Recruiting, talent acquisition. You guys have been around this channel for any amount of time at all. You know how important I think talent acquisition is, whether it's traditional recruiting or transfer portal or whatever you want to call it. Good college football players is what wins games. Now, that doesn't mean that you can just look at a talent index and say this team's definitely beating that team and that team's definitely beating that team, but you got to have players to win games. And for, whatever we think about Mario Cristobal's decision-making on Saturdays in the fall, which is questionable at best, when it comes to talent acquisition, there's not 5 people on the planet that do it better than Mario Cristobal. And I do think his long-term prospects are better than Manny Diaz's. Manny Diaz, of course, has taken over as head coach now at Duke after the previous stint at Miami, then defensive coordinator at Penn State. Now, he's an elite defensive coordinator. I don't even think Miami fans would try to crap on him in terms of his ability to run a defense. Look what he had Penn State humming last year defensively. All their problems are on the offensive side of the ball. Duke brings in a transfer quarterback. They lose Riley Leonard, brand new head coach. Good couple of years for Duke. We'll see. Can they keep that momentum going under Manny Diaz or not? I don't know. But I've got Cristobal a spot ahead of him. I got Cristobal at 5. I think this is an important year for Miami and Cristobal. If Cristobal blows a game with piss poor coaching decisions in the fourth quarter again this year, and I look up in November or the beginning of December and Miami's sitting there at 7-5. It's going to be hard to justify keeping Cristobal ahead of Diaz at that point. Again, I told you the records already. Cristobal's got a losing record in his time at Miami. Mario Diaz was 21-15 in his time at Miami, and they fired him to hire Cristobal. Now, you can, again, I get it with the talent acquisition. I'm on board. Believe me, I've been screaming from the mountaintops. Recruiting, talent acquisition, that's where it's at in the world of college football. So I understand the Miami fans' argument for Mario Cristobal. But at the end of the day, you got to win these damn games. I mean, you can have, look, Texas, how much, do we give Jimbo Fisher any credit? No. Look, he had an amazing recruiting class. He had so much talent on his roster, it was ridiculous. The guy couldn't win a game. At some point, you got to start winning these things. You can't be Miami and losing to Duke and Georgia Tech every year. You can't do that. I don't care who the coach is. You got to stop with that. Let's keep going. For now, for this year, I've got Cristobal 5 and Diaz 6. But Cristobal better do something this year. I've got Clawson at 7. Talked about him already, the head coach at Wake Forest. Mack Brown, I've got at 8. So national title winning head coach. How much credit do we give him for that? That was almost 20 years ago. It was 19 years ago. 2005, he won a national title at Texas. You know, the shine has worn off that. One of the most disappointing coaching jobs in America, in my opinion, over the last 2 years goes to Mack Brown. However, you know, it's not like they're winning 3 games a year. And I am giving him some credit. I'll tell you this, if he didn't have a national title at Texas in 2005, I'd have him below Narduzzi, probably below Lashley, and slightly above O'Brien. So I'm still giving him some credit for winning that national title 19 years ago, but my God, the last 2 years were bad. Considering what they had there, the last 2 years were bad. Mack Brown's on his last leg. I don't expect him to be there, but maybe another year or two. I don't think they're going to fire him. I think he's just going to, it's time for him to retire. I've got Narduzzi at 9, Lashley at 10. Curious to see how SMU does in the ACC this year. Of course, they were considered a power program back in the day, early to mid-'80s. Remember the Pony Express? And they famously got the death penalty in the mid-'80s for straight up paying players. I mean, they had them on salary. There wasn't none of this underhanded, $100 bill handshakes or none of this sort of secretive stuff. It was right out in the open. Here's a contract, sign it. We're going to give you this amount of money. They got busted, death penalty. They had to disband their entire program for a year. They weren't allowed to be on TV for a couple of years. They just completely destroyed them for 20 years. They fought their way back into the Group of 5, became a pretty good Group of 5 program. Now they get their shot in the Power 5, or what I guess now we're calling the Power 4, with an invitation to the ACC that starts this year. Curious to see how they do with Lashley there. O'Brien at 11. Again, talked about what he did at Penn State. We'll see how he does now in sort of a revamped ACC. I've got him at 11. Brent Key at 12 and Brent Pry at 13. So I put Georgia Tech head coach Brent Pry a little bit ahead of Virginia head coach Brent Pry. He's got a better record. I mean, that's what it came down to, honestly. Brent Key's got a winning record. Brent Pry doesn't. Brent Key's 11-10. Now, Brent Pry's been there a couple of years longer, and I actually think Virginia could be a better team this year than Georgia Tech. But in terms of the coaching and what they've done so far, I'm a little bit more impressed with Brent Key in 2 years at Georgia Tech than Brent Pry at Virginia. So I gave Key the nod over Pry, 12 and 13. 14, I've got Wilcox at Cal, 15, Taylor at Stanford. Both of these teams are going to struggle this year massively, in my opinion. And then I've got Tony Elliott last on the list. And if you want to talk about hot seats in the world of college football, or specifically the ACC, it's pretty easy to look at a coaching ranking list. And if you're one of the last 2 or 3 on there, you're probably on the hot seat. Tony Elliott, I think, definitely on the hot seat at Virginia. Taylor at Stanford, he hasn't been there very long, and let's be real, I don't think Stanford as an institution cares that much about football, so they're probably willing to put up with a lot of bad teams before they make a decision there. Wilcox at Cal, he could be looking at another year or two if he doesn't get it turned around before they move on from him. Brent Pry, I think, could have a breakout year this year. Same with Brent Key at Georgia Tech. I don't think either one of them are on the hot seat, so really it's just Tony Elliott. If you were going to ask me how many of these coaches might be fired after this season, over, under 1.5, I'd take the under 1.5. It could be Tony Elliott. I don't know if there's going to be 2 that get fired, though. And then, of course, Fran Brown, I've got unranked. He's never been a head coach before. I like the move. I like what he's done at Syracuse. I think he'll take them some amount of steps forward. I don't know how many, but we'll be able to more accurately rank him next season after he gets a full year under his belt. But there you go, ACC coaches, tier list and ranking. Let me know where I'm wrong down below. Let me know where you disagree. And look, a lot of people yesterday were like, because I did the SEC version of this yesterday, they were like, I can't believe you have such and such at 3. He shouldn't be there. Okay, well, who? I mean, that's lazy. Don't just tell me you don't think Diaz should be 6. Okay, where should Diaz be? Who should be ahead of him? You going to put Mac Brown ahead of Diaz? You going to put Lashley ahead of him? So don't just say this, this coach shouldn't be here. Tell me who should be there then, and how far down should they move? Anyway, appreciate you watching. Please hit the thumbs up. Please remember to subscribe, and I'll talk to you all again soon. Have a good morning.